Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lecture 2 of our Hip Hop module. This is our final lecture for the semester, and we are going to begin talking more in depth about those traces of dance forms and people that we find when we're looking at breakdance specifically. So, when we're looking at breakdance, we find inspiration from people like James Brown, as mentioned earlier, but also the Nicholas brothers, who were tap dancers, and we also find people like Snake Hips Tucker. This is not an exhaustive list, so this is just some of the people that come to mind when I'm looking at what's listed in our specific lecture. Tap dance is a form that we find in breakdance and in hip hop. Lindy Hop, Capoeira, we find Asian martial arts forms, we find gymnastics. So across the board, we find inspiration from Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and South America when we're looking at these dance forms. That breakbeat. So I mentioned that we have a continuation of that idea of movement that's married to the music, and we had to understand, similar to jazz, we had to understand the music in order to understand the movement. Well, here's why. That breakbeat. So in the 1970s, DJ Kool Herc creates the merry-go-round. He extends the drum beat. So in that funk music, there was and in other records, there were these drum breaks. So the drummer had a solo that lasted about 4 measures. Well, DJ Herc figures out a way to identify it on the record and extend that break, so it now is more like 16 measures rather than at 4 measures of music, which then creates this space for dancers to dance. Hence, we have the break dancers because they're dancing on that break in the music. It was a break for everyone else because it was a drum solo. So those drum breaks were usually you were usually in a 4/4 time. But as we see the music go on and continue, it's further iterations from this technique that was created by DJ Herc is not always in a 4/4 time. DJ Herc creates a technique that informs music going across the board. So if you've listened to New School, if you've listened to EDM, if you listen to acid breaks, if you've listened to Florida breaks, if you've listened to dubstep, all those forms of electrical music find their foundation in this technique created by DJ Herc in the 1970s. Now, in your reading, they talked about the structure of that fixed format of the breakdance battle. And now we're going to take a deeper dive into that structure and talk about these components that make up that form. Those components include the top rock, the down rock, the freezes, and the power moves. But let's make some connections. Earlier in a semester, I brought up, within the jazz specifically, I brought up that in Cuba, in the forest, the rumba music was created. Now, the music was created, and then there were some movements created in the forest, but then it moved out to the greater population and becomes rumba as we know it now. Now, there's a rumba that's danced socially and in parties and things like that, and then there's ballroom rumba, which is ballroom is more performance based. Rumba has three parts in its traditional formation. It has 3 parts. It is about rumba in itself. The dance is about courtship. It's about 2 people courting one another. More specifically, it also has links to the characteristics of a hen and a rooster, and as their mating rituals that you see play out if you're looking at the animals. So the dance itself plays those out where it's a game. The guy is trying to get the woman. So the gestures of the dance are that. They are of the guy getting the woman, trying to get her. So her blocking, and it's a competitive, playful game. The other side of that is, and it goes through a process. So there's a process that's very slow. The one ko is very slow. You're getting to meet each other and feeling each other out. And then there's a second dance where it's kind of like, hey, I want you, let me get you, kind of playful. And then there's a last version that is called Columbo, which is this acrobatic movement where the guy is showing off his machismo, he's showing off his agile, powerful movements. He's showing, hey, I am the dude that you want to be with. But this is where there becomes a bit of a battle, because this is also the place where other men can kind of say, hey, look, but I'm over here too. Now that section, that the movement, those gestures and things are part of what's encompassed in this breakdance battle. So those top rocks include some of those gestures, include some of that same intention, that same idea of showing the machismo, of showing off, of the boast, right? This is where we start to see that boast of, here I am, here's why I'm amazing, is implanted into that top rocks. That down rocks is still an extension of that. That's the footwork. You're still showing yourself off. Those freezes are these suspension movements. And these power moves are acrobatic moves. So think about that idea of gymnastics. So I immediately think of the moves on a pommel horse, and that the way that the legs are swinging around, that that idea, that intention, that movement does have a space inside of the breakdance battle. And it's because going to that idea of these dancers creating this space for themselves. In this space, they can be whatever they want to be. So an athlete could be part of it. Which brings us into that sacred circle. The cipher is a competitive acrobatic battlefield that uses pantomime gestures and moves to overpower, outdo the previous opponent. So there is healthy competition that goes on. Proclamations of power, power moves, and possibly of violence discourage and have been used to discourage women. So this masculinity that shows space in the breakdance battle isn't part of a lot of things. Remember that this sacred space, this circle that are created by the dancers, prevents other people from coming in. So your bodies create a barrier from outsiders, so that person inside of the circle can be vulnerable to a certain extent, meaning they can express some of their highest dreams. They can be the best version of the person that they want to be. They can talk to you through gestures and through pantomimes and through actions about who they want to be in life, right? And there is that space of the rumba, which that Columbo specifically, which is about the men showing that they are the ideal mates, that they are strong, that they are agile, that they are ... But there's also this idea that outside of that space, outside of that circle, there are these stressors. So people are being pushed out of their homes. People are still feeling like still being treated as less than because of where they live, because of the color of the skin, because of the jobs that they have. So in this circle, there is there is a need to create alter egos, or just show like what is inside of you. That sacred circle, dancers are allowed to create a world or a period of time, for a small period of time, an improvised period of time, right? That fixed format tells you about how long that period of time is, where they can be anything they want it to be, a rich, an athlete, successful by their definition. This movement and this battle also provided a momentary escape from poverty or other stressors, but also a place to boast and build self-confidence. In the ideal situation, this movement combat was intended to replace a fight. So one, you have this space of being your ideal you, but also you have this space of of dealing with your stress. Earlier in the year, I talked about when energy, when emotion builds up, there's a physical manifestation, right? You stomp your foot because this thing wells up inside of you and you just have to get it out. So there is also space in that sacred circle for you to deal with the not so pleasantries, but to actually deal with them and go through them. So this dance form, and here's where we get into that, dance as medicine, this fixed format provides a space for you to cope. Movement as a coping mechanism. It also was strategically done when we take a look back to Africa Mbata, when we look at what else is going on. There were actual gangs in New York, so not just like Gangs of New York, the the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, and the 5 points was an actual thing. And to bring it into context, so we stay in alignment, Master Juba was a resident of the 5 points in New York. So Gangs of New York was a real thing in life, and there are people that actually lived through it. But there continued to be gangs in New York, and fighting was ensuing. So when Africa Mbata talked about that idea of contributing to your community, well, through Zulu Nation, those original members of Zulu Nation were gang members. He brought those gang members into a space to talk about what was going on. What's going on? Like, can you really find a way to deal with it? And if you can't talk through it, maybe you can dance through it. And if you can't dance through it, then maybe you can talk to it. So there was really high rates of gang violence prior to Zulu Nation, the formation of Zulu Nation. And then there was a decrease. There's a documented decrease in gang violence. Did it go away completely? No, it didn't go away, but there was a drop in gang violence. And it is directly related to Zulu Nation and the people of Zulu Nation finding some agreeable space. Please take a break. That was a lot. Take a break if necessary. If not, I'm going to continue going. Breakin' is a movie that came out in the early 80s where we see this in the 80s and begin to fade as media plays more of a part in social media, but as media plays a larger part in hip hop, excuse me. Those original movies from the 80s, so hip hop has been going on, breakdancing has been going on for a while now and has had mixed reviews. But these movies in the 80s have actual breakdance crews. And I bring that up because sometimes in movies now, you'll see an actor play a role, and that actor might be the star, but they're not necessarily a dancer, right? So, or they're not the strongest dancer. Well, in Breakin', you see two actual breakdance crews. So if you click the link in your guide, or you cut and copy paste, you'll see the Rocksteady crew, which is in blue, and you'll see the New York City Breakers. But this is also begins once with media, we begin this globalization of the technique and the form, because Rocksteady crew then moves into Hawaii. There's a whole Hawaii branch of the Rocksteady crew. Women, battle moves often, I said women because we're going into the female body and its place in politics, but the quote on the screen. Battle moves often accentuate and bring attention to the male physique. Crotch grabs, legs falling apart, and forceful pelvic thrusts, right? This is a reminder of the slide that we went into, but now looking at it from a different perspective. These proclamations of power, power moves, and possibility of violence discourage and have been used to discourage women. This is a quote and information, I'm sorry, it's not a quote, but this is an information taken from portrayals of masculinity in hip hop films, because we're continuing to talk about the body and how it's used in space and its inscription, and as it relates to movies. So B-girls exist, but during those earlier times of hip hop, they were seen more like trophies. They were the person lusting over the dancer, right? So let's go back to that analogy of the Roomba and the use of the Roomba, right? So the woman comes in, they found out who you are, and then the men battle, and then the woman goes with the person that wins, right? So the women are tokens. I mean, they're trophies, they're tokens of victory and trophies, rather than seen as actual competitors. I believe that part of this is due, one, to the nature of Roomba, but also it's due to how America views gender roles. So what does it mean to be a woman? And could the woman do these physical movements and still be seen as feminine? Or are these activities too masculine? And I bring that up because we see how that plays out in dance form. We saw it in the Romantic era as it related to the Danish ballet. I brought up that while in France we saw that shift during the Romantic era, that shift to the female body, that shift to men being more partners and focus on the female body, but we did not see the same drastic kind of shift in Danish society. And historians have attributed that to the fact that gender roles are more equal in Danish society, or were more equal in Danish society during that time. So Tina Marie, in all of her wonderfulness, in this position, can you do that position? Is it feminine? Is it masculine? Does it have to be gendered at all? Just ideas. 1983, Flashdance happens, and then in 1984, Break-In, which is the slide that I offered to you earlier. Now, how does media begin to influence breakdance? So as mentioned earlier, and it's talked about in your reading, breakdance is happening and people have mixed views about it. What's it for? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And even in that space, people are still appropriating and approximating the thing, right? Because they're talking about how it has this possibility to be dangerous. And at the same time, we see people beginning to have classes, have people teach them classes on how to break dance, how to do this dance form. And we see that it's making its way into our social gatherings. So even though you're not in that barrel of the Bronx, you've seen the dance before, and now at the wedding, people are starting to break dance, or at bar mitzvahs, or in random situations. Why? Because this break dancing happens in random situations. It wasn't planned, it just happened. So we're beginning to see it happen and happen and happen. At the same time, once the media picks it up, it begins to change. The first way it begins to change is the dissolving of that sacred circle. So in Flashdance, there's a small sections, only a few seconds long, where the main character is walking down the road and she sees these dancers, and they are an actual breakdance crew. They are actual New York breakdance crew, and they're going through their motions, but in order for the camera to fit in, they have to break the circle. Ooh, so we've broken that sacred circle. Now, this is a very physical thing that happens, but it has grandiose ripple effects on the dance world. So this camera comes in, it shows other people around the world this form, and the form begins to shift. The circle begins to dissolve, and we have, and I'm sorry for the misspelling of that word, we have the development of professionals and amateurs now. We saw this before with ballet, right? It was vernacular, it was at court, it was just people just learning their things and practicing. And then when the Royal Academy happens, now we have air quote professional dancers that are dancing specifically for performances that people are paying to come to, right? So with this media beginning to promote and show hip hop, we see the development of professional and amateurs. Now, I want to be very clear that this distinction between professional and amateurs has nothing to do with the ability of the dancers themselves. In this case, the professional dancer versus the amateur dancer, the professional dancer is someone that is getting paid to do jobs, and competing in competitions that are like national and international competitions, right? So we're talking about money on a different kind of scale, because amateur dancers can have immaculate technique and form as it relates to breakdancing. They might still be, I mean, even now in my hometown of Baltimore, there are still hip hop competitions in the break, not the breakdance form, but in Baltimore club form, where people do walk away with money. But if you spoke to that person might not be consider themselves a professional dancer. My friend wins some of these competitions, but he's an EMT. That's his profession. His profession is EMT. But he is a social dancer, high enough to win many competitions and high enough with great enough technique to judge in competitions. So to take it back, professional versus amateur in this situation is talking about how that person identifies themselves and how they navigate outside of their community. This inclusion of these professional and versus amateur ideas also encourages the form to become more theatrical, right? So it's not about the competition between the two anymore as it is about the competition between the two of you and the person that's watching. This also develops this codification. We talked about this before in the beginning of our semester with like the way that you do the dance when you're just in front of someone is usually a little smaller than when you're on stage. You have to exaggerate the things so that the people in the audience can see. It has to be performed in a certain way. There is a right and a wrong now. This codification happens to the movements. Hip hop is an art form. It's a genre, just like modern dance. It has variations and iterations, just like ballet. And it has many of artists. So this list is not exhaustive. I'm pretty sure that some of you that are watching this tape might have some other ideas, and feel free to shoot me those ideas so that I can add them to this list. Same with the performers. Plenty of people that continue to inform the movement. A rapper that comes to mind would be Dougie Fresh. As a rapper, he was also a beatboxer, but as an artist, how he performed a move when he was rapping that became the Dougie. So the Dougie, the movement, is actually a nod, a movement of remembrance, a gesture to the rapper Dougie Fresh. So these lists will continue to grow. The informing will continue to grow. Jazz, hip hop will continue to grow. Some styles that fall under the hip hop umbrella, once again, not an exhaustive list because the world is dynamic, dance is dynamic, and things continue to change. Locking, popping, the robot, the boogaloo, which was, happened before the coining of the term hip hop, but continues to be a thing. Breakdance, clowning, crumping, animation, a form that draws inspiration from Snake Hips, which was one of the people from our earlier slides, Baltimore Club, and New Jersey Club. Tat number 20, your final tat for the semester. This breakdance tat is about breakdance and about the media. So it is a 2-paragraph submission. Let me slow myself down. I'm getting way too excited. That demonstrates what you've learned through the reading and the lectures and throughout the semester. It's the final one. Make it amazing. In the first paragraph, you're giving that contextual knowledge about the history of the form, the structure of the breakdance battle. So by this point, you understand the fixed format and you're able to give us that, and you understand the components of it. In that second paragraph, you're recording for someone the history of that video, right? So you're making an objective record of what happened, and you're always having those connection sentences. So when I think about connection sentences, I think, how is this, what I saw, connected to what I talked about? So how are your the sentences that you wrote in your base, how can you connect them to something you maybe wrote in the first paragraph, right? So if I was talking about Roomba and in my first paragraph I wrote down that Roomba is also connected to the courting, the mating style of the hen and the rooster, then in my second paragraph, when I mention how one of the dancers shimmied their shoulders, I can relate that to the shimmying of the shoulders is a movement that mimics the rooster when it mounts the hen, right? So looking for those places of connection that demonstrate your in-depth knowledge of the thing. We cannot control everything that happens in life, but we can control our responses. And that is why I have hopefully done my best to encourage you to use your voice in a constructive and respectful way. So even if that means, and a perfect example of this would be this semester, when you fill out those, when you filled out your midterm evaluations, thank you for that knowledge. And when you do these end of the semester evaluations, let us know what worked well for you so that we know to continue those things. And if there's something that did not work well for you, tell us what would have been better. So for example, if I kept making peanut butter sandwiches, but you really didn't like peanut butter, in your notes you could write, it would be useful to have a almond butter option or a cashew butter option so that we know what works best for you. This semester was full of twists and turns, but I hope you found some piece of knowledge or experience that helped you grow into a better person. Have a wonderful day, and I wish you many blessings in your life.